In your book, in your latest book, Storytelling with you specifically organize the book into three sections: plan,
Yes.
then create, then deliver. And so it sounds like a lot of what you've been talking about uh, since my preceding question has been related to getting that sequence right and yeah, following the steps along that sequence.
Yeah, and so we've talked about some of the content that's in the plan section. So I'll just walk through very briefly what folks will find. So plan, the first chapter is all about audience, being specific about who they are, how to get to know an unfamiliar audience, how to resonate with your audience. And there's a case study that's introduced in the first chapter that I build throughout the book, so you can follow along and see what it looks like in a real world setting. And actually, the final presentation for that is a YouTube video that's online that folks can check out as well. I can send you the link to include for that. So, audience, second chapter, as I mentioned, is all about the big idea and getting your key message clear and concise. Third chapter is compiling the pieces. And so it's all about storyboarding and really putting together a low tech plan of attack. And then chapter 4 is story and how you can take your low plan of attack and now arrange it along the narrative arc, when you might want to do this, how to be successful. And that brings us to the end of the plan section. And the whole middle section of the book is create. There's a chapter on bringing your low tech planning into your tools. So, how to take that framework and set it up so that you're never starting with a blank page. And so your order and story comes into your tools and makes sense. There's even a bit on the tactical, how do you design a slide template and pick colors and fonts and those sorts of things. Then there is a chapter each on content that is graphs. So that's bringing the storytelling with data pieces directly through in terms of designing graphs for communicating. There's a story on, or excuse me, a chapter on words as content, both how you title, but then how you can use words within a presentation on your slides, and then a chapter on images. And so the idea is at the end of the create section, you now have this combination of slides or materials that are going to help you get your information across. And then the final section is deliver. And this is all focused on you and what you can do to become comfortable and confident and articulate and be the best representation of the message that you want to get across. So there's a chapter there on building confidence. There's another on rehearsing and practicing aloud that goes into recording yourself and some of these tricks that we've talked about. The penultimate chapter is all about introducing yourself and the art of the introduction, which is actually a really fun place for people to start, particularly if you don't have an upcoming presentation or communication need. And it's a nice place to be able to test out a lot of the strategies when it comes to storyboarding and forming a story on a topic you know really well yourself. And you think about how often do people really think about and spend time crafting their introduction and how they talk about themselves. And it doesn't have to be a formal introduction, but even the one liner that you give when you're at a networking event, or how you convey yourself in your work sphere versus in other spheres of your life. And so it's a really neat exercise to be able to work through to get a glimpse of content that comes up elsewhere in the book. It becomes almost like a mini case study. And then the final chapter is what to do directly before, during, and after that important presentation. And so a lot of this is as if you're standing from stage or giving a keynote. You can be, but there are tips and tricks that are going to be very useful in any time you need to communicate basically anything. It can be the weekly steering committee where you need to get people to pay attention and have a specific discussion. I'll stop there.
Nice.
Awkward one.
Another good pause. All right. And so that gives us a very nice general overview of the book. I haven't read it yet, and I am absolutely dying to. I mean, this is presentations, whether they are trying to get buy-in internally at my company on something, or whether it is a keynote, like you say, at some data science conference. I need these skills. There's so much here for me to be learning. And this idea, like the framework that you provide around getting all the disparate things that I want to cover in a presentation or that I think are important, getting those down to like one big idea that I can convey in a single sentence,
Yep.
building a story around that big idea that supports it, pulling in the right data. I too often I often get started right at the create stage. So I don't
Yep.
really do the planning stage. Like maybe I have some rough idea in my head, but oftentimes it's just kind of like, what have I done before that I can build on? So
Yep.
like what slides have I done before that are kind of relevant to this audience? And I kind of just start there.
It's where a lot of people start. And it feels, I think a lot of people start there because it feels productive. It feels productive to put something on a
Exactly.
slide and then to have
Mhm.
another slide, another slide, another slide. But taking just a little bit of time up front, and it doesn't have to be long, right? Half an hour of devoted thought time of thinking about your audience, crafting your message, maybe storyboarding a bit, thinking about how you're arranging things. And the end of that half an hour, getting feedback, hopefully, as well, if that's important, you have a plan of attack. And it helps ensure that the time you're spending on your materials is appropriately directed, right? We've all had this situation where we've made a slide or made an entire deck only to give it to someone or have the presentation and realize, oh, that actually wasn't what was needed at all, right? I misread it or I didn't think about it or I assumed this was going to be the direction we wanted to go and it wasn't. And some planning time up front can save a lot of time.
Another big thing that I always mess up in addition to not planning before I start the slides is that I include way too much every single time. I never give a presentation that isn't a sprint to the end. Once I'm like, okay, there are 10 slides left in 3 minutes. Let's go. I always do that. And so in chapter 3, you specifically emphasize the importance of intentional discard when planning
Yes.
content. And so it sounds like that in the planning stage is going to be helpful for me getting out of the trap of trying to include everything. All of this is important. They must get all of it, no matter how quickly I speak.
Well, and then you speak more quickly, and then more filler words come. Right, it sort of, yeah. You get in this spiral. Less is almost always more, and I'll often give the advice that you can always fill the time. People will have questions, or there'll be discussion. Plan less content than you think you need, always. And even if you get done early, people aren't ever mad about that.
No, I know, right?
Right?
They're
"Hey,
never mad.
I
It's
know I
always
had
great.
30 minutes on the agenda, but I've only taken 20. I've given you the best gift of your day, 10 minutes of your
Uh,
time back."
so yeah, a little bit of planning up front, and you could end up spending way less time on the presentation overall
Yeah,
because maybe I bet a lot of my talks should be literally half of the slides that I make.
or no
Maybe a
slides.
third.
Maybe it'll just be
Yeah,
you talking.
or
Well, and
yeah.
with presentations in particular, you never want your slides to be competing with you or it feeling
Right.
like this race that you have to get to the end, right? The attention should be on
Yes.
you. Your slides
Mhm,
are just your helpful visual assistant
mhm.
when needed. And I think the presentation, the recording of the case study of storytelling with you is a nice short example of what that can look like in a business setting.
Nice. Yeah, we'll be sure to include that in the show notes. And something that you mentioned there that is my something that I do actually, I think, get right. I'm sure there's always room for tons of improvement, but something that I'm pretty good about and that I implore to people that I'm giving presentation tips on is people so frequently, you talked about competing with your slides. I thought what you were going to say was this thing that you see constantly, 90% or more of presentations. It's like the norm. It's like what people think they're supposed to be doing is having tons of words on a
Yeah.
screen in that are like sentences, and then people don't even the presenter, like, you can't both be reading the sentences on the screen and listening to the
No.
presenter.
It's
It's
an
impossible.
invitation to not pay
It's
attention.
an
Yes.
invitation to not pay attention. And yet it is what almost everyone does.
Don't do that.
Don't do it. That's like I'm like one step on the many steps of the journey that you've been on. And well, yeah, at least, yeah. I there's so much
That's a fun
I'm
place though, because then, yeah, there's so many things to try, and it's not about doing it all at once, right? Each time pick one thing to focus on and rock it, and then you just kinda keep adding to that over time.